a very similar way, black and blue. She is the CEO of this initiative and will be with us during the whole event. My name is Barbara Weber. I will be your guide today, at least for the next 60 minutes. Let me first introduce our speaker to you, and then we will do some housekeeping before we jump into our topic. So with us today is Rasha Abdul Rahim. She is an expert in human rights technology and social justice. Rasha and I have to declare right away, I'm a big fan. We worked together at Amnesty on the global level. Rasha used to be director of Amnesty Tech, and I was director global strategy and governance. And Rasha led many amazing initiatives. One that got a lot of public attention. Maybe you have heard of it. She might talk about it today as well. I don't know. The project Pegasus, together with Forbidden Stories, this project revealed that Pegasus spyware was used to surveil journalists, activists, politicians who were raising serious concerns about privacy and democracy. Welcome, Rasha.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining. So, as I already said, we will have 60 minutes together. We will start with some questions for Rasha, and then we will also open the floor for you to ask questions. If possible, as I already said, and many of you did, thanks so much. Please turn your camera on if you're comfortable with it. If you want to speak, put your hand up. And if you prefer to type, you can also type your question in the chat. We would love to hear you speaking, but it's okay if you don't want to. Julia kindly agreed to monitor the chat for us, and we can also work with written questions. And before we go to our first question, Julia, I think we have some technical things you would like to take us through.
Thank you, Barbara. I would use this opportunity also to say hello to everybody. I'm very happy to have you here. And from my side, just the two notes. First, that we record this meeting because we want to share this with other people who would visit our on the website or who were registered for this event. They would receive this copy of this record. And the second, please, if you're not talking, just mute yourself so that we can hear better the speakers. I guess it's enough. And yeah, let's have a good discussion.
Excellent. Anything else, Julia?
No, I guess it's all for technical side. If you have any questions, just write me in the chat. I will support you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Julia. So, as you know, the issue we would like to tackle today is like huge. And sorry to tell you right away, we will not solve it all. We will not cover it all. Intersection of human rights, big tech requires to look at ethical challenges brought by big tech companies. I mean, look what's happening around the world. It's mind-blowing hard to get our heads around that and what it actually means for us. Technical advancements are really rapid and fast. So it heavily impacts a lot of our areas, from privacy, freedom of expression, equality, and many more. So we think it's vital for us, and many of us work in civil society organizations, that we actively engage. It's not for us to have simple, easy answers. Quite likely they are not there. Maybe Russia has some of them. But it's not easy, but it's important, I think, that we find ways to join forces, think together, work together, and get our heads around all this in a way that we can, on the one hand side, use AI responsibly, And on the other side, also look at the bigger picture and see what we can do to actually protect human rights, work with tech companies in a meaningful way, actually influence and impact them. Really depending who we are, what we are, where we work for. So we will tackle the issue from many different angles and would like to involve you also in our thought process we want to start together with you today. Before I go to my first question for Russia, I would like to challenge you for a second and ask all of you actually, can you think about the last time you interacted with AI? For some, it's part of their job. For others, it's like, oh, have I done this actually? I'm not so sure about it. So I think we are in many, many different places. Maybe it was a chatbot, social media algorithm, facial recognition. Think about it if it made your life easier or if it raised concerns, just for a second. Do you have something? Do I see some people nodding? Okay, some people already type. Wait a moment. Okay, now take it a step further. Do you think AI helps us protecting human rights, or is it actually threatening human rights? Drop, and this is a big challenge, drop one word into the chat that describes how AI makes you feel. One word. How does it make you feel? So not how you used it, but spooky. Yeah, I get that. In awe. Yeah, this is nice to start with spooky and in awe because it has both, right? Mixed, here we go, mixed feelings. The whole scale, irritated, yeah, by the hype. Again, both. Curious. Manipulating, right? Helped. Mm-hmm. Strange and curious. Yeah, you can see already in the chat, it's kind of both, right? It's somehow awesome, it's somehow spooky. So how to go about that? How to tackle it? Russia, before I ask you my first question, how does it make you feel?
How does it make me feel? I guess wary.
Thank you. So my first question to you, as I said, I will ask Russia a few questions. And after that, we will also open the floor for you to ask some questions and we can have a dialogue. So my first question for Russia is, AI and human rights often intersect in unexpected ways, as we know. Can you share with us examples of artificial intelligence as a powerful tool to expose human rights abuses or even violations? And can you tell us your experience, how such tools can be responsibly adopted by NGOs, by the civil society sector?
Sure, and thank you for the question, and thank you for the exercise as well at the beginning. I think what this shows, and I hope what's going to come through in what I talk about next, is that I'm definitely not anti-AI. I think AI can be applied in really exciting and helpful and innovative ways. So it's not that it should be banned or we shouldn't use AI. Actually, to the contrary, I think what needs to happen is there needs to be some safeguards and guardrails in place to ensure that we are able to unleash all of its potential and not go sort of innovation at all costs without thinking about some of the potentially harmful impacts that may emerge. So I'll answer your questions in two parts, Barbara. So the first one about how artificial intelligence systems can be applied to expose human rights abuses and violations. I'd like to point to three examples, and unfortunately, all of these three examples are from my work at Amnesty. I left Amnesty in October, and I'm now a consultant. But the most sort of salient examples I have are from my work at Amnesty. So I'm kind of giving Amnesty free promo here, which I'm happy to do. The first one is from 2016, where we worked with Amnesty's crisis team to investigate bombings and chemical weapons attacks which took place in Darfur. And so at the time, Amnesty launched a crowdsourcing project that got sort of thousands of digital volunteers to scan huge amounts of satellite imagery to identify burned and destroyed villages. And then Amnesty worked with two machine learning experts to sort of build a machine learning model on this crowdsourced data to apply that to other parts of Sudan. So to apply that on a countrywide scale. The second example is Amnesty International I should stop saying we because I don't know if you're experiencing that problem as well, Barbara, but Amnesty International also did an investigation into online abuse against women in 2018. The project was called Troll Patrol, and the objective of that project was to provide a quantitative analysis of the really unprecedented scale of online abuse against women, and it focused on the US and the UK. And at the time, when I was at Amnesty, we launched a project, again, involving thousands of digital volunteers to analyze tweets that mentioned women journalists and politicians. There were about 770 of them. And again, we partnered with a AI company called Element AI to develop a natural language processing model to detect abuse in, I think it was around 14.5 million tweets that mentioned the women journalists and politicians that we'd selected for the study. And really, what machine learning enabled us to do was to, of course, sift through all of that huge data and to extrapolate really valuable insights into the scale of abuse targeting different types of women. So, for example, the study showed that Black women were 84% more likely than white women to receive problematic or abusive tweets. That if you were a woman of color, so Black, Asian, Latino, or mixed race, you were 34% more likely to be mentioned in abusive or problematic tweets. So without that machine learning capability, we wouldn't have been able to analyze all of that data in the speed that we were able to do so. But it also taught us many valuable lessons and showed us, what the current, what at the time were the limitations of machine learning in this area. And, there were trade-offs, right, in the weighting of the algorithm that required, a lot of value-based judgments and, would applied on a larger scale would have serious implications on the rights to freedom of expression and other human rights online. And then most recently in 2023, we launched an investigation into the mental health impact of TikTok on young people. And in order to avoid exposing young people from, harmful content or from compromising their privacy. We worked again with a partner to set up sort of bot accounts that mimicked the way that, for example, a 13-year-old would interact with TikTok content, to sort of understand how quickly the recommender system on TikTok would offer up harmful content, specifically mental health content. So, these are just a few examples of how you can use this technology to extrapolate really insightful data and carry out qualitative analysis on huge amounts of data that you wouldn't be able to with just people. And so, coming to responsible use, I think if organizations are looking to adopt machine learning or other AI systems, generative AI or whatever it may be, then I think that decision needs to be firstly driven by two key pillars, which is firstly that there needs to really be a clear purpose and a value add to adopting the technology in the first place, and not just adopting it for the sake of adopting it just because it's sexy, it's everyone's doing it, so why don't we do it as well? I think that's when you kind of fall into the trap of not thinking through the objectives properly and not actually getting the most effective use out of the technology that you'd like to adopt. So it needs to be targeted, it needs to be strategic, there needs to be a clear purpose and value add. And the second pillar, I would say, would be that human oversight is always fundamental. So looking at artificial intelligence systems to assist but not replace human judgment, because again, that's when you're more likely to encounter some of the dangers that arise from using these technologies, such as bias or relying too much on the decisions that the AI proposes, instead of automation bias, basically, instead of actually interrogating some of those suggestions or decisions. And then, once those two things, I think, have been thought through and considered, then there's a list of things that would be required to ensure responsible use. Now, I won't go into them in great detail because I know that there's other questions coming up. But data protection, transparency, and disclosure. So, what systems are being used when, ensuring those systems are able to be audited, ensuring there's an ethical framework guiding the use of these systems that prevent or mitigate wider societal impacts, bias mitigation, security measures, monitoring and accountability, looking at the environmental impact of adopting these systems. These are, just a few considerations. I can go into more detail if time allows. That I think organizations would have to consider in order to do this in a proper and responsible way.
Thanks a lot, Rasha. And for those who think, oh my God, it's just the big or whoever, it's only big organizations who can actually do things like that. We will try to also show how this can be used, how tools can be used by small or middle-sized organizations, as many of you don't work for huge international organizations. But we thought we would start with the big picture. So you just said it, AI as such, it's not good or bad, it's the use of it. So it needs regulation, it needs policy, it needs us to shape global norms. When I look around and look towards the future, well, some years ago, I would have said, okay, it's not easy, but come on, guys, we have done this before, we can do it. How can we collaborate as civil society and shape global norms, shape policies? Right now, I'm not even sure if this is a realistic question anymore. But anyways, I will ask you this question. How do you think in a world like this we can collaborate as civil society and just contribute to shaping global norms, shaping policies to actually use AI responsibly based on human rights and justice? Or do you just say, Barbara, come on, ask another question?
No, I think it's a very pertinent question to ask. And I'll just talk a little bit about the context that we find ourselves in now, which is extremely depressing and demoralizing. But I promise that I will end on a positive, slightly positive note, or hopeful note, not positive, hopeful. So the context, which I'm sure you're all aware of, and you will not have missed a lot of the really worrying developments that have happened since the beginning of the year. So what we've seen since the beginning of the year is that big tech companies' unchecked power over our lives, over our democracies, has just been laid to bear. The new tech oligarchy has been unmasked. Companies have shrugged off any pretense of operating in alignment with human rights or democratic values, and that's clearly been shown by several things. Zuckerberg announcing in January changes to Meta's policies, so scrapping fact checkers and allowing some really horrendous content to flourish against marginalized communities such as LGBTQI communities, trans communities, migrants. And although these don't apply in the EU, they're still extremely worrying, and content is borderless, and anybody is able to see it. Other changes: Nick Clegg, who used to be Meta's head of global affairs, was out. Joel Kaplan came in to replace him. For those who don't know, Kaplan was the deputy chief of staff to George W. Bush between 2006 and 2009. He was recruited by Meta in 2011, but he was managing American affairs at the time. But now, sort of this shift to global affairs shows a sort of rapprochement between Meta and the Republicans. There are reports that Google's going to follow suit as well and not implement fact checking for search. TikTok thanked Trump for restoring its services earlier this year. Pretty much every single big tech company donated at least $1 million to the Trump inauguration. So there's a lot of unmasking that's happening, and tech companies are sort of just showing that they will align to whoever is in power. And of course, I can't not mention Elon Musk and the fact that he has an entire government department now. I can't believe I'm saying these words, but he does, and he's hugely influential in the US and beyond. Now, sort of also having very strong opinions on foreign policy issues like Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, and others. And so, it's very telling the era that we're in, and the fact that we have a big job ahead of us to try and restore democratic values and enforce regulation on technology companies and AI specifically. Another very sort of pertinent development was the fact that Trump rescinded the executive order on AI, which was brought in by the Biden administration, which actually introduced some pretty good guardrails when it came to the development and use of AI systems. That's gone. And there's huge $500 billion investment in Stargate, which seeks to build AI infrastructure in the US. So we are on the back foot when it comes to regulation. In the EU, obviously, we have the EU AI Act, which is the strongest. It's a landmark regulation, is the strongest that we have at the moment. But there is a huge fear in the EU now when it comes to enforcement of regulation. And in fact, there's a drive towards deregulation in some circumstances. So the EU recently withdrew plans for an e-privacy regulation and for an AI liability directive. And we also see, on the other hand, that the EU is investing hugely in AI efforts. So France announced at the AI summit earlier this year 109 billion AI investment package, and the EU also announced a separate 200 billion euro investment for AI gigafactories. So I said I would end on a hopeful note. I think the hope comes from the EU. The EU has the strongest, most developed, most progressive regulatory tools at our disposal, and I think that's where we're going to see some hope. Although, as I say, the EU is very reticent to enforce because of fear of retaliation from the US, and the US has said that it's going to protect US companies. But I see also an opportunity as well. So for a very long time, the voice of global majority countries has been missing from the AI debate, from AI regulatory circles, and there is a big opportunity here for them to step in and sort of set the direction, set a different direction when it comes to AI regulation. Again, that's also a tough sell. But I think whatever happens, we have to continue to push the EU to enforce its laws. There are other good laws in South Africa, in Brazil, that we should push to be enforced. And essentially, we need standards that allow push states to identify what the risks are, so conducting regular human rights impact assessments, mitigating risks, ensuring transparency and accountability in the use and development of AI systems, so making sure that there's independent analysis and oversight over the systems, that they're auditable, and are subject to meeting standards of accountability and transparency, and then ensuring that there's oversight as well, so creating mechanisms for independent oversight. So one mechanism that was proposed, this was a couple of years ago, so in end of 2023, was a sort of the establishment of an AI safety agency, like the atomic agency. That just does not seem to be, anywhere realistic right now. So yeah, I think enforcement of existing laws, pushing for the enforcement of existing laws is the best that we can get. I don't see us getting any sort of new regulations anytime soon.
Thanks a lot, Russia. No, I think it's not realistic, but it's good to have the parameters in mind and understand what we have to look at and not lose sight of that, I think. So we will lower our altitude a bit in terms of the world and AI and human rights and how to influence everything. And I would like to look with you a bit more at protecting rights of communities that are marginalized. So you already talked about surveillance, bias in AI systems. So what concrete steps can NGOs take on the national level also to hold governments, corporations to account to protect communities that are marginalized?
Yeah, so I think there are definitely some things that can be done on the local and national level. On the local level, I can give an example of several states in the US who campaigned to ban the use of facial recognition systems in public spaces. San Francisco, Portland, Oregon are some examples. And these were locally led campaigns, and they were hugely effective. So that's one thing, and I know that Amnesty is also pushing for national and city level bans for facial recognition and other biometric systems that are used for mass surveillance as well. So I think that can be very effective, and also quicker than getting national level action taken. Second, as I said before, pushing for enforcement of existing laws. We've got to use the regulatory tools that are at our disposal. There's also tends to be, particularly in the EU, regulation fatigue. And so we've got to test what we have and enforce what we have to be able to recognize what the gaps are, to be able to then plug those gaps if we need to. But we do have to use the tools that we have right now. I would also say strategic litigation is extremely effective and has been extremely effective, especially where there are gaps in the law. You can have case law that starts to shape other regulations as well. So, and supporting also communities through funding, especially affected communities, through funding to be able to pursue legal action, because taking legal action against big tech companies and even smaller companies that develop AI systems is extremely costly. It takes a lot of time. And NGOs the size of Amnesty struggle to take these kinds of to bring these kinds of litigations. So how would you expect individuals or smaller organizations to take these on? So I think we do need to be able to equip people with the tools, the knowledge, the money, essentially, to be able to pursue these cases. And I think just taking a step back and going to kind of the root of the problem, the fact that many of these systems are developed by predominantly privileged white people in Silicon Valley, without the involvement, without even thinking about how these technologies will affect marginalized communities. So ensuring that there's meaningful consultation and involvement of marginalized communities in the development and the rollout of these systems, because these are the people who are unfortunately disproportionately impacted by the abuses that come out of these systems. And I think also, continuing to expose the harms that we see from these systems. It's incredibly difficult to research because a lot of these technologies are proprietary. A lot of the time we don't know when they're being used. But there are ways to get around that. Freedom of information requests. There are incredible organizations doing research, investigative researchers, etc. So these are just some of the ways that we can hold them to account.
Thanks a lot, Rasha. I have two more questions for you, and then I will open the floor for others. One is really on your own lessons learned. What can you share with us here that can help and guide other organizations in navigating the ethical dilemmas we all are facing related to AI when we do our work?
So I think, as I said at the beginning, ensuring that you have that clear objective, clear purpose of why you want to introduce that technology in the first place, and ensuring that it's not replacing but assisting the humans. I would, the other things that I think I've learned is that it's really, really important to have a strong principles and a strong conceptual framework around your demands, right? And these need to be based in international law. The International Human Rights Framework already provides a very strong basis for regulation, and it's a universally applicable. It's enforceable. There's accountability mechanisms built into the International Human Rights Law Framework. I know that at the moment there's huge distrust and sort of dismissal of the effectiveness of the International Human Rights Law Framework. It's under attack, but it has some very strong universal principles. And although we see day in and day out that these principles are not universally applied, that's it's the sort of best we have at the moment. I would say also to ensure that any sort of, if we're making recommendations when it comes to the adoption of the development and adoption of AI technologies, to make sure that those recommendations are concrete and practical. So, we don't want to ban everything, and we don't want to ban the use of everything, because that's one, it's just not realistic. It's that, you know, the horse has bolted, has already bolted. But also it's not appropriate. Like, there are huge benefits to adopting AI technologies if it's done correctly. And I think, you know, in navigating some of the ethical dilemmas in our work, and sort of thinking about what we want to advocate for when it comes to the use and development of AI technologies, we have to be balanced, otherwise we won't be taken seriously. And I would also say one of the biggest lessons I've learned is that we've got to walk the talk. So at the time I was at Amnesty, we were developing an internal policy on our own use of AI systems, and it was very important that our organizational policy was consistent with what we were demanding of governments and of corporations externally. So I would say that's also very, very important, because that lays you bare, right, to reputation, rightly so, to reputational risk and also legal risk. You know, when looking to adopt these tools, you've got to ensure that you're respecting the law and the jurisdictions in which you operate. So yeah, I'll leave it at that, because I'm conscious of time.
Thanks a lot, Rasha. That's already very helpful. And I saw quite a few people smiling when you said walk the talk. Easy to say, hard to do sometimes. And in terms of frameworks and other things, I mean, there are also organizations like AI4NGO who can help you with that. So you're not completely alone with this. And it's not just about big organizations. My last question to you, Rasha. So more concretely, I mean, many organizations face resource constraints. They operate on very tight budgets. So something like strategic litigation, this is far from the reality of many colleagues, I assume also here in this virtual room. So how can small or medium-sized organizations practically leverage AI technologies, but really in the day-to-day work? So I'm not talking Silicon Valley and how can we influence policies. I'm really talking day-to-day business. I go to work, I want to use it, but I don't want to compromise core values. I want to walk the talk and still stay within the capacities I have. What would you answer to that?
So I think I would say it's really important to have an agreed internal approach to how you want to use these systems, and who uses them, and who is responsible, and who is accountable, and that's in a way that's easier to come up with if you're a smaller organization. You don't have to consult a million different people. And I think once you have a clear set of guidelines to guide your use, you can then go and explore how and what you use. I think for smaller organizations that have these kinds of constraints, partnerships are incredibly helpful. You know, when I was at Amnesty, we didn't have a huge budget. And the way that we managed to do that, the work we did, was through partnering with other organizations that had both the expertise but also the resources to do the work. So I would say exploring partnerships is really helpful. There's also lots of cost-effective and ethical ways to adopt these technologies without overextending your capacities. There's lots of kind of free or low-cost AI tools, chatbots, you know, ChatGPT. There's Meta. Meta has AI tools as well that can help with like inquiries and FAQs. There's automated transcription and translation services. You know, there's a bunch of free tools out there and low-cost tools out there that can be adopted. So I think by starting small and focusing on tools that complement existing workflows, and of course keeping those ethical considerations, you know, at the core, that is a way to start. and also learning from others, learning from other organizations of a similar size who've done this successfully as well.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. And also, as I worked in Amnesty in the impact area, we see in so many areas that partnerships make such a big difference in terms of progress and impact. So I think it's key. And now I'm promoting to Julia AI4NGOs because I think it's such an excellent example as a partner who can support. Let's open the floor now for questions from you, from the audience. As I said, if possible, raise your hand. I already see one hand. And if you don't feel comfortable talking, then thanks. Robert is doing it actually with his real hand. That's also great. But you can also put your question in the chat if you're not comfortable with it. So first, Bernard, and then Robert.
Thank you
Go
very much.
ahead.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Rasha. I would have thousands of questions, but I try to restrict myself from because you just opened the floor. What I would be interested in is we will have this year a focus on Concordia social projects. We are supporting children and youngsters from vulnerable backgrounds in 5 countries. We have a focus on digital safeguarding this year. And what I heard from you as an example or examples was quite interesting for me to look into. And I have 2 questions to you, Rasha. The first is on collecting metadata. So if we, for example, now look into behavior of children in the digital space, especially also using AI or whatever is going, so mostly in the direction of abuse, of course. How trustworthy are these data which we get? So how did you do these checks? And secondly, also, is there any tools which you would recommend? This is the first question. The second question is more on the practical level. So do you have experiences or examples what kind of tools we could offer to children and youngsters to learn how to best possible use AI and protect themselves also from the, let's say, the damaging side of the AI? So this would be my 2 questions.
Thanks a lot. If it's okay, Rasha, I will collect 2 more questions and then give it back to you to answer them. So we have one in the chat before I go to Robert. As Arena had technical issues, I will read it out. So how do you verify the information collected by digital volunteers and manage the risk of AI hallucinating? That's Arena's question, and I will take one more from Robert and then give it back to you, Rasha. Go ahead, Robert.
Thank you very much, Rasha and Barbara. That was a very exciting introduction. My question is similar to what Bernhard was saying. Are there any specific tools already out there that are trained for human rights outputs? Just thinking of the online courses that we developed at Amnesty, such tools would have been fantastic. They would have saved us a lot of time, a lot of back and forth with law and policy. So I would love to know if there are already tools that are trained specifically on human rights content, or maybe tools that are trained on judgments from the European Court or other things. So it would be lovely to hear a little bit more about such tools. And then I have a second question, but that comes later.
Thanks a lot, Robert. Back to you, Rasha.
Great questions, thank you. So there's quite a few similar ones, so I'll group those together first. So on how to verify the data and ensure that the digital volunteers were correctly labeling things, and so I'll use the Online Abuse Against Women project as an example. So it was a lot of work, but we had to spend a couple of weeks training volunteers on how to correctly label a certain material, and then obviously you would have someone who would kind of make sure that they understood, and were checking their work, and we would only use the volunteers who got the highest level of the highest score basically when it came to labeling the content correctly. Were there might have there been some errors? Probably, but a lot of work and effort went into ensuring that they were trained properly, that their work was checked, and then that was then applied to the machine learning system. But as I said, the machine learning system was weighted. There's a trade-off, right? If you can weight it in a certain way to be able to catch all as much abusive content as possible, but then that would result in false positives. But on the other hand, if you weighted it in another direction to be to sort of not catch every single piece of content, content that didn't cross the threshold of being abusive, then you would get false negatives. So it's always a trade-off. And I would say the other thing is we work with technical experts whose job it is to do this, right? Computer scientists and machine learning experts, and that's why we did the partnerships. Amnesty doesn't have that expertise in-house yet, although hopefully it will in the future. So that's how we made sure that we worked with the right people, and we interrogated the results. And we also got our so the samples and the machine learning algorithms that we were using. We got them peer reviewed by other organizations and blind tested by other organizations to ensure that they were actually accurate. And Barbara mentioned the Pegasus project as well. This is slightly different, but in the Pegasus project, we had a bunch of security experts, online digital forensics experts who were working to try and trace digital attacks and uncover digital attacks, spyware attacks on people's devices. And we're using a lot of very advanced technical capabilities in order to do so. And again, in that context, we got that the methodology peer reviewed, and the devices also tested by a partner organization to make sure that it was all accurate. So I think that there are several ways to do it, but partnering with the technical experts and getting the samples and the models peer reviewed is absolutely critical. When it comes to what tools to recommend for children to protect themselves against AI systems or against other sort of online abuses, there's actually a human rights education course, again, by Amnesty International, that's available online, and it's free. That is available in different languages that anybody can access. So that's one. And then the second thing I would say is that, so now I'm currently leading another movement. It's called People versus Big Tech, and it's basically a movement of 140 organizations working to enforce EU regulation when it comes to digital rights. And we have a youth movement that's currently growing, and they will be developing also some content that will be made available later this year that people will be able to access. So there's quite a few things out there. Robert, your question on tools for human rights. Sorry, excuse my cat who just loves to come when I'm talking on when I'm talking on calls. I don't actually know. This is not my area of expertise, but there are people within Amnesty who would know, who work in the crisis unit, that I can put you in touch with the relevant people. And then there's also a center in Berkeley, the US university, who do a lot of use these tools in a lot of human rights research, and so they will know what tools are available. I'm sorry, I'm not the best person for this question.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Rasha. I know Robert had another question, but I would want to first see if anyone else wants to ask something. Does anyone else have a question? Bernard has millions of questions, but we would have time for one more round, like 3 more questions. Is there anyone else? Then Robert and Bernard and Arena. If not,
Thank you, Barbara. I would jump in straight away if that's okay.
go for it. Go for it.
So I have one question that relates very much to how you seek, receive, and impart information. And more specifically to Google, because I have seen in my line of work, I'm at Human Rights Careers, search engine optimization is important, getting the content out to people is important. We are a very small team, but because we're good at search engine optimization, we manage to reach millions of people. And I see sweeping changes in the moment in the way how Google works. It's really it's a apocalyptic for a lot of content creators, and I know that if we work in human rights, we're very often content creators. If we are in NGOs, we publish blog posts, we publish content on social media. So that's very important. In one hand, to get supporters on board, in the other hand, to get donations, in the other hand, to just also for corporates to monetize our contents. And I just wanted to ask if there is already a discussion going on to be a little bit more concrete. Google is now launching AI overviews, mostly in the US, but this is going to be rolled out everywhere. And what it does is taking the content from NGO websites, from entities like Human Rights Careers, from corporates, etc. It does not put the source out, so you don't know where this content is coming from. And it essentially destroys also the accuracy of your content because it hallucinates a lot. So it's a very big problem because we put our resources and efforts into the content development, whether we be corporates or NGOs. But then Google is kind of the gatekeeper in between, produces inaccurate content, and are there already? I'm interested how others are tackling this. If others maybe in the group have similar issues, already feel that the change is really dramatic. I see tens of thousands of websites that are losing 90% of their traffic, 95% of the traffic, while Reddit is skyrocketing, and we know that Reddit has a contract with Google. So I will be interested in that.
Thanks a lot, Robert. Bernard, if you have a very short question. No. Okay, it's fine. Then I give back to you, Russia. And wait a moment. I have a question in the chat. As a small NGO, we have received the accusation that using AI to optimize our communication, proposal writing, etc., is unethical in itself, as it gives us undeserved edge over NGOs doing the groundwork manually. Basically, replacing human volunteers with digital volunteers is unethical in itself. That's a big one, right? Russia, go for it. And at the same time, as we only have a few minutes left, I would ask you to wrap up from your side. And if colleagues want to still comment in the chat, you're of course welcome to do that.
Okay, 2 big questions.
Yes.
So Robert, that's really interesting that you mentioned that. I don't know if you've seen, I'm going to post it in the chat. There's a campaign called Make It Fair. It's run by creatives, basically. So singers, news publishers, others that are sort of criticizing basically the way that the likes of OpenAI and Google are able to scrape all of this incredible data or these incredible outputs that people have painstakingly worked to produce to train the AI models, and they're not getting sort of any compensation or credit or anything for it. So I see there's a bit of a parallel here. I'm not aware of any sort of initiative to challenge that when it comes to NGOs, but others here may know more. And then the accusation about using AI to optimize our communication. I don't know if that's a fair accusation. You know, ChatGPT is available for anybody to use. It's free and it's highly effective. It's scarily effective, but of course, you know, it's not perfect, and no AI is perfect. So I would say, yeah, but yeah, replacing human volunteers with digital volunteers, yes, that is a really tricky situation. And you know, it goes back to my first point, you know, when you're looking to adopt these technologies to ensure that you're not replacing, they're not used to replace, but rather to enhance you know, people's jobs and get them to focus on more important things while using these technologies for sort of maybe less high stake tasks.
Thanks a lot, Rasha. And I know Julia in AI4NGOs is also dealing with this when working with organizations, because of course people are scared because jobs have to change, they transform. They have to become something different, new maybe, and sometimes it might even replace certain jobs, and hopefully people can find new jobs. But it's huge and it's not easy to answer. But I know that Julia is also tackling this and dealing with this. No simple answers, but I'm sure as the time has run out, I can't ask you, Julia. But what I would ask you is just make sure people know how to get in touch with you and AI4NGOs, so that you can also support and guide colleagues to sources. You have tools you know about, and I see you nodding, so I know Julia will do that right away. As I said, 1 hour is not enough for that. I think we really started with the spooky and the awe of AI and human rights. We tackled like the importance of human oversight as a fundamental part, so that AI assists and does not replace human judgment. Despite the drive for deregulation, Russia's ask to still use what is out there. Go for transparency, accountability, a clear purpose why you want to introduce technologies, walk the talk, have a strong framework based on human rights laws, and AI4NGOs can support you with that. Now I feel like I'm promoting, you promoted Amnesty, I'm promoting now AI4NGOs. Partnerships crucial to actually tackle this huge issue. And last but not least, start small, as Russia said, and learn from others as a very good advice for this overwhelming topic. With this, I would end this session. Would like to thank Russia for your input and your insights into the work. It was really, really helpful. I see a thumbs up already. So if there are any other questions, just type them in the chat, or conclusions you have yourself. I saw some doing this already. Thanks a lot, Julia, for giving us the opportunity to have this conversation, and have a wonderful start or rest of the day, depending where you are at. Thanks a lot for joining this call.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you very much.
Well, thanks, Julia.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.